Hi, in this video I'm going to show how to import a CSV file using SequelPro. Now we are importing the CSV file into your MySQL database, and SequelPro is just a convenient front end to do this importing. Now in this video I'm going to use SequelPro, but if you have a Windows and you are using HeySQL, you should watch the other video that shows how to use HeySQL for this purpose. Now, to start out, I'm assuming you have successfully connected to the database using SequelPro. In this particular connection, I am connected to the Notchi database, which is my database on the SMG Teach 2 server. Now, to load a CSV file into this database, go to File menu, click on Import, and then browse to the particular CSV file that you are interested in importing. Now, CSV file is a very useful format because you can get this get any data table in a CSV format from Microsoft Excel. You can always export a table that's in a Excel file into a comma separated value format using Excel's export options. Now, when you select the file in this open dialog window, you'll see many options. The first one essentially says the format in which the data is. CSV is the format in which this particular file is, so we're going to leave it at CSV. You don't need to worry about encoding for this exercise. Now below that you can see a checkbox saying whether the first line contains field names. What that means is at the top of the file there is one line that indicates the column names. In our file we know that the first line does provide column names, so we're going to select, we're going to check this box. There are several more options that you can change, but for this exercise you don't need to. For instance, the first one might be useful in another setting when you have a file that is not comma separated, but where the columns are separated using some other field like tab or semicolon or a pipe. You can select the appropriate separator if your file contains or uses those. Now we don't need to change that here. Here our columns are comma separated. So let's leave the default as they are and click open. Now SequelPro shows you a preview of how the data is going to be imported. The first line, the first column shows the fields in the CSV file. That is, this column is being read from the file directly. This column here indicates the column names in the table that will be created when this file is being imported. On the right hand side, MySQL gives its best guesses about the type of these columns. It guessed that the project ID contains integer. It guessed that the capacity contained integer. Sometimes it guesses wrong. For instance, it guessed that the start date is a character string, but we know that although character string can hold the start date, we know that it's a date, so we're going to change it to date. Finally, we need to provide the name of the table that we're going to create. Now, to keep things consistent, let's name it as project. Okay, so after that, I'm going to click import. But before that, if you want to see how different records are going to be imported, you can click on this right arrow button here, and it will show the next row that is going to be imported. So the next row will have 1, AA, 5, and 2000 January 1st as its values, and they are going to be imported into project ID, project name, capacity, and start date in the table, these columns in the table. Okay, so let's go ahead and click import, and as you can see, the data is successfully imported into the project table. Now, if you want, you can add, it's a good idea to add a primary key to this table. So to do that, go to structure, go to the section that says indices or indexes, click on plus. You can see that the field project ID is already selected. So what it is going to do is it's going to create a primary key on the column project ID for the table project. Go ahead, click add, and you have the primary key created. Now I'm going to show you one more import using the worker table. Let's go ahead and import the worker table too. Go to file, click import again, select the worker table. You don't need to change any of these settings here. Click open, and here you have the preview shown by SequelPro about how the data is going to be imported. Now, one thing you have to notice here is that by default, the table selected is project. Now, we don't want to import worker into the project table, so we want to create a new table for the worker data. So let's click new and enter the table name. Let's call it worker. Okay. Things look good, except the birth date should be of the type date as opposed to varchar 250. Okay, now everything else should be fine. Let's click through this right arrow to see a few sample records. Okay, things look good. Okay, well, supervisor ID is of type integer, worker ID is of type integer, and the other three are character strings, which is fine. Now let's go ahead and click import. Okay, now let's take a quick look at the data that is just imported. Let's go to content tab, and as you can see, the dates are all here. The worker ID and supervisor ID are integers, and they are here too. Good, so things look good. Now let's wrap it up by adding the primary key into this table. For that, let's go back to the structure and add a primary key here. Now it automatically selected the worker ID as the primary key. Go ahead, click add. Okay, so this shows you how to import data that is in a comma separated value file that you can export from Excel. How to import that into your MySQL server. Now keep in mind that these tables are now created on your SMG Teach 2 server, not on your computer. These tables are existing now on your SMG Teach 2 server on your database. Okay, now the homework asks you to create 3 tables and establish foreign key relationships too. So I'm not going to complete the homework here for you. So go ahead and import the third file, that is project worker yourself, by following steps very similar to what you just saw. And if you have any question, do let me know. Thanks.